Welcome to Voices, Unseen Quietly Real, where real lives are remembered, not loudly, but truthfully. I didn't notice it the first time it happened, because it felt too small to name, and because small things are easy to ignore when you're busy trying to do your job well. I shared an idea in a meeting, calmly and clearly, and it landed like it had fallen into soft carpet, absorbed without sound or response. I told myself it was timing, or that maybe I hadn't explained it well enough, and I moved on the way you do when you don't want to seem sensitive. A few minutes later, someone else repeated the same idea, almost word for word, and suddenly the room leaned forward, heads nodded, pens moved, and someone said, "That's interesting," like the thought had just been born right there. I felt a strange pause inside my chest. Not anger yet, just confusion, the kind that asks a question you don't want to finish. I didn't say anything in that moment, because I was still trying to understand what I'd just watched happen. I told myself I was imagining it, because that was easier than believing something else. I wrote it down later in my notebook, not as proof, just as a way to make sure I remembered it correctly. Over time, it kept happening, and repetition has a way of removing doubt. I would offer a solution, and it would pass through the room like air, unnoticed and unrecorded. Then someone else would say it, sometimes minutes later, sometimes days, and the same idea would be treated like a breakthrough. I started paying attention to my own body in those moments, the way my shoulders tightened and my voice softened without permission. I noticed how quickly I learned to stop insisting, to stop repeating myself, to stop filling silence with the same words that had already been ignored. It wasn't that I didn't believe in my ideas anymore. It was that I didn't believe they needed to be defended to people who weren't listening. There was a meeting one afternoon that stays with me because of how ordinary it looked from the outside. The room was cold in that way. Offices are when the air conditioning is set for machines, not people, and the fluorescent lights made everything feel flatter than it was. I sat with my hands folded, listening, waiting for the right moment to speak, the way you learn to do when you don't want to be dismissed. When I spoke, I kept my tone steady, careful not to sound impatient or overly confident, and I offered a solution that would have saved time and money. No one responded, not even with disagreement, and the conversation simply moved on. A few minutes later, a colleague said the same thing, and someone smiled like a problem had just been solved. I remember looking down at the table and seeing my reflection faintly in the polished surface, distorted but still there. I remember thinking, for the first time clearly, that this wasn't about ideas at all. It was about who the room was trained to hear. I went home that night, tired in a way that sleep couldn't touch, and I sat in silence longer than usual before turning on the lights. I replayed the meeting in my head, not because I wanted to be angry, but because I needed to understand what part of it belonged to me and what didn't. The answer was uncomfortable, because it meant admitting I was working in a system that filtered my voice before it reached the air. The next day, I tried something different, not to test anyone, but to protect myself. I held back, stayed quieter, let the conversation move without me, and watched the same ideas rise from other mouths and be praised again. It hurt less when I expected it, and that realization scared me more than the dismissal itself. I started noticing the same pattern outside of work, in group conversations, in classrooms, in casual discussions, where everyone was supposed to be equal. When I spoke, people nodded politely and moved on. But when someone else echoed me, suddenly the room paused. It was like my words needed a different body to be considered real. I didn't confront anyone, not because I was afraid, but because I was tired of explaining things that shouldn't need explaining. I didn't want to become a lesson, or a case study, or a moment of discomfort people could talk about later. I wanted to do my work and be heard in the same breath. There was a temptation to stay silent completely, to let the room do what it was already doing and save myself the effort. I felt it every time I opened my mouth and wondered if it was worth it. But silence has its own cost, and I could feel it accumulating quietly, like dust you only notice when the light hits it just right. One evening, after another long day, I wrote down every idea I had shared that week, and every time it had been ignored or borrowed. Seeing it on paper made it harder to dismiss, but also clearer in a strange way. I wasn't losing my voice. I was learning how it was being redirected. Over time, something shifted, not in the room, but in me. I stopped measuring the value of my thoughts by the reaction they received. I began to speak when it mattered to me, not when I thought it would be rewarded. There was a moment, months later, when I shared an idea again, knowing full well what might happen next. When someone else repeated it and received the credit, I didn't feel the same sting, because I had already decided that my worth wasn't waiting for permission anymore. That choice didn't fix the system, but it fixed something quieter inside me. I realized that being unheard doesn't mean being unimportant, and that repetition doesn't change ownership. Some truths land slowly, and some are carried forward by people who don't know where they came from. Letting that be enough was its own kind of freedom. I still speak carefully, not because I have to, but because I choose to, and there's a difference that matters. I still notice when ideas are taken and celebrated only after leaving my mouth, and I still feel that small ache because I'm human. But it no longer defines the room, and it no longer defines me. Sometimes the hardest part of being unseen isn't the silence that follows your words, but the way the world pretends it heard them all along. Learning to live with that truth is slow work, and it happens in quiet moments when no one is watching. It happens when you decide that your voice doesn't need an echo to be real. If this story feels familiar, it's because many people have lived it without naming it. These moments pass quietly, but they add up, shaping how we speak, how we wait, how we decide when to try again. And sometimes, simply recognizing them is the beginning of being free from them. This was Voices Unsigned Quietly Real, Episode 8, and there are more true stories coming soon. So, if you'd like to hear more like this in the future, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a quiet place to listen.